So again, take your time with this question. This might require one more step than you might think initially. Okay, so quite a tricky question here. And the key here with the ratio, again, you would get more time in the exam because for some reason with our Menti, we have a shorter amount of time. But in terms of a question like this, can someone talk me through how the income brackets work? So does anyone understand how the income brackets work on a question like this? Because most people were a bit confused and chose 6,000. So Natalie, are you able to talk us through how the income brackets work?
Is it that the first, for example, the first 10,000 that they earn, it gets put under a certain tax bracket, and then anything over that is put under a different tax bracket? So you need to find the percentages of each part.
Exactly. So can you remember what the first tax bracket was? So it was between 0 and how much?
Was it 10,000?
Exactly. So it was between 0 and 10,000, and the percentage was, I believe it was 10%, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean that anyone earning over £10,000, what are they? What is the absolute minimum amount that they're going to pay in terms of tax? So let's say they earn £10,000. How much are they going to earn in tax?
So if they earn 10,000, then they'd have to pay £1,000 tax.
Exactly that. And then what about that next tax bracket? So that was, I believe, between 10,000 and 20,000, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so.
And that was at 15%. So what does that mean in terms of that that value? So any money between 10,000 and 20,000, what's the maximum amount of tax that can be paid in that bracket?
£1,500.
Exactly. Okay,
yeah.
So that's 1,500. And then so far we've got up to 20,000, and that means that there's £4,000 left. Okay, so there's £4,000 left. And what do we do with that value then, Natalie, in terms of calculating the amount of tax that you pay in that bracket?
So the £4,000, it was 25% tax.
Yes.
So you find 25% of 4,000 and add that to the 1,000 and 1,500.
Yes, absolutely. So what I'll try and do, I'm just trying to get the question back on. For some reason, it's just not loading on my screen. So what I can do is I've just tried to put it into the chat to go through each tax bracket. But essentially, to summarize, on a question like this to do with tax and tax brackets, what you have to do is you have to work out each tax bracket one at a time. So if someone earns £24,000, they are not taxed 25% on all of the £24,000. They're taxed in brackets, and that's called tax bracketing. So in the first £10,000, there'll be a certain amount that they pay. In the next £10,000, there'll be a certain percentage that they pay. And the next £10,000 or £20,000, there'll be a different percentage that they have to pay for. So again, the whole point of putting this question up is to just allow everyone to be aware of this type of question, which is going to come up in your practice, and it's the tax bracketing questions. So if people are still a bit confused about the tax bracketing, I can just clarify it one more time. So if someone earns £24,000, they are not going to get taxed exactly a percentage on 24,000. So they are going to get taxed in brackets. So the first £10,000 gets taxed a certain amount. The next 10,000 gets taxed a certain amount, and then the next 10,000 or 20,000 will get taxed a certain amount. So what we have to do on any tax question is work our way through each tax bracket one at a time. And that's how we work out the tax bracket question. So what I would definitely recommend is have a go at these questions, do some practice questions in your spare time, So far, we've gone through 3 of the most common questions that come up in the UCAT, and they are percentages. So that percentage tip that I gave you at the beginning. The next one is ratios that come up all the time. And the next one is tax bracketing. Okay. So yes, Isa, did you have a question? Sorry.
Yes, hi. I understand the £20,000 and that's under the 15% tax bracket. But I was just wondering, for the 4,000 that's left over, wouldn't you do 10% of 4,000?
So not quite, Isa. The reason for that is because we've used all our allowance in each tax bracket. So our first £10,000 have been used up. So that's been paid for. Then our next 10,000 has been paid for. And now this remaining £4,000, that's now in our third tax bracket. So we've gone from our first tax bracket, which was 0 to 10,000, then our second tax bracket, which was 10,000 to 20,000, and then the third tax bracket is 20,000 and above, and the remaining £4,000 that hasn't yet been taxed yet will fit and slot into that tax bracket. So
okay, you go down the tax.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that is the real take-home point from the tax question. Is I want everyone to essentially work their way down the tax bracket and almost basically pay off the total income slowly, one at a time, through the tax brackets.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. So yeah, I just had a few questions in terms of the tax brackets that people have sent to me, and hopefully that clarifies it. Again, the whole purpose of today is to give you some of these questions so that you can appreciate them and then go away and do some practice and start working on them. So if you are still a bit confused, I can kind of work through it again one more time. But again, the key take-home point with tax brackets is work your way down each tax bracket. That's the absolute key. Okay, so let's have a go at this next question. Brilliant, fantastic. So again, would really like someone to answer this question. So Omar, are you able to answer this question, how you actually got to the answer here?
Yeah, so I took the amount of protein per bar and did a quick ratio of each one using the total mass of the chocolate bar. And from there, I kind of compared all the fractions and the ratios together mentally, and then chose the one that I felt like was the largest.
Fantastic. So did you use the calculator at all for a question like this?
I felt like using a calculator would consume too much of my time, so I decided to kind of rely on mental maths here.
Fantastic. So this is another absolute classic example of a typical question in the quantitative reasoning section. And this question comes up all the time. And what most students do is they actually go about and you get their calculator and they start calculating every single answer. So they'll calculate the amount of protein per gram for Raisin Bite, for Flapperjack, for Gummy Bear, for Choco Bar, for Crispy Crunch. When actually for a question like this is a classic eyeballing, or I call it guesstimating question, where you have to eyeball each chocolate bar here and actually work out roughly the amount of protein in each one. So what I seem to notice on this question is that majority of the bars had about a kind of 1-to-1 ratio of kind of, I think it was something like 1 gram of protein per kind of 1 gram of a chocolate bar, roughly. But for some reason, Choco Bar or Choc Bar had quite a significant high proportion compared to the rest. So this question, again, another classic of the quantitative reasoning where you don't actually need to use your calculator. You need to use your good eyeballing skills, and you work your way and do a bit of guesstimating and mental maths to get to the answer. So again, this is the kind of fourth key take-home point from today, which is there are certain questions in quantitative reasoning where you don't need to grab your calculator or write things down aggressively on your piece of paper. You actually can get to the answer by doing some good eyeballing skills. Brilliant, so well done to those people. So in terms of questions like this, the reason why we were quite tight with the timing is that it roughly does come to about 40 seconds per question. Some questions you'll be able to answer in 30 seconds or 20 seconds, and it might give you more time on another question later on. But can anyone tell me a technique that might be useful to help you with your timing? So let's say you come across a difficult question or a question that you're quite unsure of in quantitative reasoning. What should you do about it? Yeah, so Rosianna.
So what I tend to do is I look at the question first rather than looking at all of the information, because there tends to be a lot more information than you actually need. So if you wrap your head around the question, then it becomes a lot less daunting and the information just becomes kind of smaller, sorry. So you take less time on that question.
Fantastic. And that literally brings me on to this point of, I call it the question information question rule. So what you're doing is you're looking at the question, then you look at the information and scan, and then go back to the question again. So you're absolutely right, Rosanna, in terms of look at that question first. That's so important in quantitative reasoning. Then you can go about looking at the information, because what they try and do on the quantitative reasoning section is they try to overburden you with too much information, and they try and do that on purpose so that you get a bit confused, or you start to kind of misinterpret the information in front of you. So that's a really important point there, Rosanna. And what if you start looking at a question, Rosanna, and you start to realize that it is a bit too overwhelming and there's a bit too much information and too much to do in about 40 seconds?
I kind of just eyeball it, and then if I think, oh, I'm going to spend too much time on this question, I'll put the most suitable answer I think it is, flag it, and move on. And if I have time, then I'll come back to it.
Absolutely. So the key here for everyone in terms of questions in quantitative reasoning is if they look too difficult or too overwhelming, you have to do a bit of eyeballing and guesstimate the answer and then move on straight away. And what we tend to find year on year with the UCAT, and in particular quantitative reasoning, is that some students will spend 2 minutes or sometimes even 3 minutes on one question just because they might not understand it, and it's taken quite a bit of time to wrap their heads around. And what happens is, as soon as you start spending more than 1 minute on a question, is you're jeopardizing the entire section. So yes, you might end up getting that question correct, but you're jeopardizing the next 2, 3, 4 questions. So that's why it's really important to, for example, in that previous question, most people probably found that they didn't have enough time to get the calculator out or calculate the exact number of exact amount of protein in each bar. But if you just did a bit of eyeballing and a bit of guesstimating, then you would have got the answer. And if you didn't get the answer, that's fine. You just pick and select one which is reasonable and then move on straight away. So those are 2 really key points for quantitative reasoning. That first one, just to clarify, is the question information question rule. And the next one is ensuring that you do a bit of guesstimating and you move on as quickly as possible. Now, when a lot of you are starting practicing for quantitative reasoning, what I want you to do is I do want you to spend good quality time going through every single question in front of you. I don't want you to skip questions. I want you to start appreciating every single one and then understanding. The skipping part will come a bit later on. So this is maybe about 1 or 2 months before the actual UCAT exam, where you start, when you start doing your mock papers and mock practice papers, then you can start thinking about skipping questions. But very early on, I'd highly recommend not doing that, because I just want you to appreciate the question and see how you would actually answer it. So again, I know a bit of an exhaustive list, but I would say that this is literally the key take-home points of the 10 tips for quantitative reasoning. So in my opinion, the most important from this list are master the calculator. So appreciate that this calculator is quite difficult to use, so you have to use it wisely. You don't have, it means that you use that calculator very how would I say it? Basically, try and always use it for one step. That is the key. So on each question, try and use that calculator for one step, maximum 2 steps. So example of this is that percentage question where that we had earlier on. We could just use the calculator for one simple step, and that was a very reasonable time to use the calculator. But some people might have inputted something into the calculator and then done a second step or a third step even, which might be a bit unnecessary and long-winded. The next most important bit is it's imperative that you use mental maths and start practicing your mental maths. So even if it means going back through 1 times 1 all the way to 12 times 12, so that classic table, go through that and just ensure that you're up to date. Another tip that I would say is try to learn what 1 divided by 4 is as a decimal, 1 divided by 6, 1 divided by 8, and 1 divided by 12. That is a real top tip, because that seems to come up in terms of being able to answer a question, just knowing that off the top of your head rather than inputting it into a calculator. And then remember, in the exam, you do have a whiteboard that you can use. So you can write down steps if need be. So if there are 3, 4, 5 steps required for a question, then you can write those intermediate steps down. Now, let's say, again, Rosanna, I can ask you this question. So let's say you have a question in the quantitative reasoning section that requires you to go through 3 steps of working out. So you have your first line, your second line of working out, then your third line, and then you get to your answer. What do you think the UCAT answers what do they do in terms of selecting the answers to try and trick you? So I know it's a bit of a difficult question to wrap your head around, but do you kind of understand what I'm trying to get at here?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Normally the answers are based off of the steps that you take. So A will probably be the first step. So someone might see A and be like, oh, I've already gotten this. So they will choose that answer, but you kind of have to look away from the answers for a second and make sure you go with your initial gut instinct to do the rest of the steps.
Again, absolutely huge key take-home point from today is that this comes up all the time in the UCAT quantitative reasoning section. For example, exactly what Rosanna said, anyone who didn't quite understand that, I can repeat that one more time. What they do is they will insert answers. So for example, answer A, answer B, and answer C might be the answer to your first step, your second step, or your third step of working out. And they do that because sometimes students get quite trigger happy when they work out something in their first step and they see that answer in front of them and they select it straight away. But what I want you to do is just ensure that you go through each step, then get to the answer, and then select the most appropriate one. And they do this all the time, and you'll start to notice when you start practicing your questions that you will start to see those answers crop up. And another example is that first question that we did, where I think the percentage increase was 317%. But I don't know if anyone noticed, one of the answers there was 417%. And they did that absolutely on purpose because they know that some students will use this shortcut technique, but they will forget to do the -1. And that's why they include that. So a few questions in terms of timing. What I would say is please, for the time being, don't worry about time. Try and get to the answer first and try and practice these questions step by step rather than rushing through them. That is my top tip in terms of practicing straight away. Then later on down the line, you can practice your timing under the time conditions and start to think about that 40 seconds, 45 seconds per question. So in terms of help, again, what we do this day in, day out in terms of kind of the one-to-one tutoring for quantitative reasoning for each section of the UCAT. So if anyone has any particular questions or wants any advice in terms of UCAT tutoring, then just let us know. What the idea behind the quantitative reasoning section in particular is we go through the 18 different topics that come up in quantitative reasoning and teach you how to answer them in the kind of logical, quick steps. And that's the whole idea of it. And again, we have lots of YouTube videos, lots of extended kind of questions that we have on our website as well. So just feel free to go onto our website, check out the resources that we have. And if you are interested in one-to-one tutoring or using our bank of questions, then you can just get in contact with us. And also, loads of people recently asking about hospital work experience and work experience. So what we've done recently is we've actually set up a new piece of hospital work experience that is open to anyone across the country. So if you are interested in gaining work experience, it is something that we have set up recently, and that again is all on our website if you want to look into that in a bit more detail. And again, any other questions, just feel free to drop us a message or go to our website. If there are any particular questions today, I'll hang around for the next few minutes or so. But I hope this was useful. The whole purpose of today was to give you 3 or 4 key take-home points that you can now go away and practice with quantitative reasoning. And if you do have any questions or further questions, then we can definitely answer them in the next few sessions coming up over the next few days. Fantastic. So I'll hang around for the next few minutes or so. Any questions at all, then just feel free to ask. But if not, thank you very much for joining. I hope it was useful. And remember those key take-home points from today in terms of percentages, in terms of tax brackets, in terms of ratios, lots and lots of key take-home points. I do appreciate there was a lot of information given to you today, but just make sure that you are going away using some practice and just ensuring that you are reflecting on what we've covered today as well. So thank you very much.